Hey everyone, welcome back to another video on my channel. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're new, please consider subscribing. So I wanted to talk about a project that was sponsored by Artlist, and in this project I was tasked to create 10 visual effects shots to showcase some of the visual effects elements that they bought from my company, Visual Effects Pro. Just quickly, if you're looking for any professional stock footage assets for visual effects or editing, there's going to be links in the description for my shop, Visual Effects Pro, and also the collection that Artlist bought if you already have an Artlist subscription. Upon releasing these 10 shots, Artlist was meant to release also a series of behind the scenes content, and even though they released technically 8 shots because 2 of them were cancelled, they decided to shelf the behind the scenes content, but fortunately they gave me permission to release it on my channel, so thank you very much for that. So we're going to be focusing on the 3 shots that you saw in the intro of this video, and this is what we got on production day 1. We're going to be focusing on pre-production leading up to the production days, and then also going to briefly touch on the post-production process. However, I will be releasing full-length tutorials for selected shots, so if that's any interest to you, then please consider subscribing. Alright, so moving on to pre-production, this is the pitch deck I sent over to Artlist. This is actually the completed pitch deck because there were about 3 or 4 revisions that they asked because some of the shots just didn't line up, what they were looking for. So this was not a narrative shoot, so we had a lot of time for each shot on the day to kind of fine-tune different aspects of the lighting or the framing or the camera movement. I tried to find ways to basically add different features and aspects to each shot that an audience could interpret in different ways. So there's more of a depth and underlining story for each shot. I did a lot of the pre-production because I was also producing this project, but I did get a lot of help from my friends over at Lipmouth Studios, from Scott, Simon and Thomas. So special shout out to them. Links are going to be in the description for their channels and their production company website. So during pre-production, alongside all the kind of basic documents that is required, for example like a call sheet, a shot list, I also want to focus a lot on breaking down and really nailing the visual effects and making it as easy for me in post-production as I can. Even though there were some difficulties, which we'll talk about in the post-production process. Specifically, I created a visual effects breakdown for each shot that just kind of told me exactly what to do on the day and how to kind of approach it. For example, capturing a HDR image on set, what practical effects we will be doing, obviously wardrobe, what the talent is going to be wearing. I tried to kind of complement the colors I was going for, so he had this brown jacket and kind of darker jeans. Something as well that we focused a lot on was the makeup. So for Artlist, I had to deliver a Rec 709 and also a Arri log version. It's always important, I think, to capture as much detail you can because those little things are going to be quite important to making the shot feel just there's more depth to it. I actually recently uploaded a video that was about recreating this shot from the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. And when I was posting on Reddit, I got a lot of really positive feedback, even though there was so many things that I kind of rushed for that video. Someone was pointing out something very important, which comes down to little details like what I'm talking about now. And he was saying that when Brad Pitt was kind of striding on the train track rather than walking, as I was doing in my recreation, little things like that just kind of puts more realism into the shot. This is why I also wanted to approach the shoot from a very practical way. I didn't want to have Gabriel running on a treadmill. I wanted him to run on like a real field with real uneven surface that he can run on and actually run quite a bit of distance each take, which did make him quite tired, which actually I ended up using one of the last takes because it really fit the character, in my opinion, that he was quite tired. He could have been running for quite a while. Yes, it's very important to make sure you go into the small details of what's going on with the character and how he's running, why is he running like that. And then additionally, my beautiful fiance drew up storyboarding for some of the shots, and then just really helped me to kind of see more of the composition I wanted. And then based on the storyboarding, I then created the previs, which you can see now, and it's basically just to try and visually tell everyone on set the visuals to kind of feel. I mean, it's obviously very inspired by Skyfall. So after 3 weeks of pre-production, we finally had everything approved from Artlist, and then we are ready to move on to production. Most of the crew members and the cast have arrived at 5:30 in the morning. And the reason why we had a very early schedule is because I really wanted to shoot at dawn, specifically at blue hour, because it gives you this really kind of diffused and ambient lighting. While we were shooting the first shot, Sasha and Gonçalo were driving down from London with our lighting package. And they were scheduled to arrive in time to set up for the second shot, but we'll touch on that later. So the only problem you have when you want to shoot at blue hour is that you have a very small window of time that you can actually shoot. So we got there at 5:30, started setting up, and we were aiming to film at around 7 a.m. So we had an hour and a half to set up everything. So once we arrived on set, Gabriel, our actor, and I started discussing kind of the character's motives and what's really going on in the scene. I've written a paragraph of description of what's kind of going on, which gave some initial direction to Gabriel, but it was really good just to kind of tone in and go through ideas we had. So once we had our ideas locked in, I went to talk with Lucy. She was our special effects makeup artist for production day one. And during pre-production, we did discuss and go through what different special effects makeup ideas we had. So we ended up going with kind of this dirt on his face and also on the jacket. And then we also added sweat, and I think it came out looking really good. So while Lucy was applying the makeup onto Gabriel, I started kind of finalizing the camera angle and movement. We were using the Adachrome slider, the kind of the smaller one, and we shot with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, and also using one of the Samyang Zine Cine lenses. For this specific shot, we used a 50mm. Scott and Simon kindly agreed to run behind Gabriel and hold up the blue screen. Basically, we needed the blue screen specifically for Gabriel's hair, because you can rotoscope most of Gabriel's body, but you really want to make sure that you have a chroma keying option for hair, because it's incredibly hard to roto and basically impossible to key without a blue screen or any kind of chroma screen. So once everything was in place, we went ahead shooting our first take.
Action!
Amazing, cut. So moving on to shot number 2, which was actually shot number 4 in the pitch deck. Sasha and Gonçalo arrived on set, I think at around 8:30. Once we had breakfast and morning coffee, we went ahead unloading the truck and taking our lighting gear to the field where we were shooting. As they were setting up the lighting, we were setting up the green screen, and we had Tommy as our stand-in so we can set up the framing and just kind of see how tall we need to put the green screen. And as you can see, I've already prepared some tracking markers with red tape. So I knew that I wanted to do a day to night conversion for this shot. So I spoke with Sasha, and he did a really great job at using negative fill and shaping the light so it seems more of a nighttime scene.
We're just setting up the second shot of the day. We've got Thomas to stand in, and I think they're just currently programming the light to have a nice sort of lightning effect. Everyone's in good spirits.
We're just setting up the lightning for shot 4. That we're going to be doing some practical effects for that. Some practical light effects. And then in post we're going to sync that up so the lightning within the clouds actually kind of correspond with the practical lighting. Unfortunately, when we got to actually filming this shot, we ran out of hands to film any behind the scenes content because we needed every pair of hands to simulate the wind. Basically, what happened is that I didn't realize that the leaf blower I brought was using quite a high voltage, and the generator I rented was not powerful enough. So we had to find another way to simulate the wind. So Sasha had a really good idea of just using some of our flags to simulate wind and just basically aggressively waving them around, but it did work really well. I think what looks really good with it is that we were doing it from a lot of different angles, so it kind of looks like the wind is kind of blowing him around. We did 3 takes and they were all really good. They were all, I think, like around 30 seconds long, and we only needed, I think, 7 to 10 seconds really to use in post-production. So it was just a matter of doing the same action a few times, and then yeah, we got the shot, and I think it looks pretty cool. It's actually one of my favorite out of all the shots we did.
Where are we at in the day's proceedings?
We have 1 shot left.
We got here when it was dark, it's now light. We've made good time overall. Yeah, we got one final shot. We just did the rainy shot, which took a while to set up. We got there in the end.
So this is where our framing is, and then our gaffer is over there, Sasha. You want to say hi and maybe explain some of the lighting?
So we're trying to recreate a Burnham house. So we've got some LED powered lights. If you want to come over here. It's a bit experimental, but we've got 8 of these DMG dashes, so they're all running off power. No, battery powered. And then we've got 2 Titan tubes to illuminate the actual green screen, so it'll be easier to key out in post. And we've got another Titan here with a fire effect, and then we've got another 600 on the floor to give that like sharp edge light on his ears. So yeah, quite nice. And they've got some blackout to mimic the house that stood up, because he stood on the balcony, and then we've got a bit of like darkness behind him. That's the plan. We'll see if it works out.
So by the time we finished setting everything up, Lucy also finished the special effects makeup, and I think it looks really, really good. And it definitely helped the shot come to the next level. And then we got to shooting the final shot of the day, and yeah, it was a wrap after that. Alright, so jumping into the project file for shot number 1, I'm just going to go through each layer and talk about what each of them contains or do. So the bottom layer is the export from Cinema 4D. As you can see, this is version 24002, so I went through a lot of different versions. I will be making a full-length tutorial for this specific shot, so I will show you the setup in Cinema 4D then, but for now I just go through the compositing in this video. I always try to make the render from Cinema 4D as close to the finished product as I can. Usually I would composite the character in After Effects, but in this case I dropped in the Roto as a 2D layer in Cinema 4D and animated him running towards the camera. Alright, so moving forward, the next layer is the fire in the background. Jumping into the pre-comp, there is a line of fire I made, so let's check that out first. Let's go straight to the next pre-comp, which contains all the fire elements. In this comp, as you can see, it's just a bunch of fire elements scattered throughout in a line. It's everything from large ground fires to forest fire elements, all of which you can find on Visual Effects Pro if you are in need of any of these. Alright, going back to the previous comp, I've just increased the exposure, which helps the glow in the main comp. There was also a problem with the 3D camera I imported, so I had to manually adjust the animation. So this top layer is just the animated layer, and the second layer is parented to it. Now, if we go back to the previous pre-comp, you also see a matte layer. The fire layer is using this matte layer to cut out the foreground elements. Within the matte layer, there are various layers that create a more organic matte for the fire elements. So starting from the top layer, this is just the Cinema 4D export, the same that we used in the main background. It's using the depth map as a luma matte to mask out the foreground. Then I also exported a frame of trees and more grass from Cinema 4D. And lastly, there are smoke elements scattered around the background. If I go into the pre-comps, you'll see it's just a bunch of smoke elements in a very random pattern. Moving back to the main comp, I'll turn on the glow layer so you can see the fire more clearly. I'm using Deep Glow, which is probably the best glow plugin for After Effects. Definitely check them out if you don't have it already. This glow layer uses the alpha from the fire elements, which is why the fire elements and the matte are pre-comped. There are 4 fog and smoke elements that are only affecting the top half of the frame. For the fog elements, if I just quickly go into the pre-comp, I added an unmold effect which makes it transparent. Then I added a curves adjustment and increased the alpha. Then back in the main comp, I added a tint effect and made them to be completely black. And then I changed their blending modes to be overlay. I found this method to add a really nice and organic texture to the dark areas of the fog that was initially rendered from Cinema 4D. To add some variation, I also added a smoke element to the left and changed its blending mode to add. So this adds just a little bit more details to the left corner. The other 2 fog layers are for the foreground. I'm using the depth map rendered from Cinema 4D to create a nice blend with the plants. Then I added an adjustment layer to add motion blur. I'm using Real Smart Motion Blur. Then some heat distortion using Video Copilot's plugin. I also added some extra camera motion using some simple wiggle expressions. Lastly, I added my version of the grade using Film Convert and Lumetri. I usually grade on the log exports, but it was nice to just export a Rec 709 straight from After Effects. So moving on to shot number 4, this is a much simpler project file. Let's first talk about the foreground layer. In this layer, I have the pre-combed keyed / rotoscoped live action plate. I also have a camera and it's animated to slightly track upwards, so the shot has more of an interesting camera movement. In the character roto layer, I was using an exported version of the comp to be able to work faster in the main comp. So let's go into the original comp. Let's start with the bottom layer. In this pre-comp, I created a garbage mat around the parts I was able to key out. For keying, I just used the default key light effect, which did a pretty good job. I would usually denoise the footage, but in this case it was alright to just use the original. If we go back to the previous comp, above this layer is another pre-comp called Character Roto PC. And I'll just go into the last comp to show you this. I used Mask Prompter to create a mat, and then I exported that as an alpha and just used that as a mat for the original ACES export. Then going into the previous pre-comp, I used a matte choker effect to tighten the masking. Then going back to the Roto matte comp, there are two layers that are duplicates of the footage, and I just had to add back different areas that Mask Prompter couldn't do very well. Lastly, the top layer is just adding the hair back using keying. Then if we go back to the main character roto comp, I've added an adjustment layer on top with a spill effect, so that gets rid of the green spill. Alright, so that's the foreground layer done. Let's check out the background layer. So before I explain the Element 3D setup, I'll go into showing you the custom texture I made. So this is a pretty large comp, it's 8000 by 4000 pixels. The bottom 3 layers are just creating the sky background, and then I basically had to look at the timing from the live action plate and match the storm clouds assets to them. These stormy clouds are also available from my shop Visual Effects Pro. In fact, as I said earlier in the video, everything you see used in this video is available to buy and download from Visual Effects Pro and Artlist. Anyway, going back to the background comp, the setup in Element 3D is pretty basic. I added the sky and lightning comp as a custom texture map. Then if I go into the scene setup, I just created a sphere and added the custom texture as the diffuse texture. I've also increased the size and changed the position slightly. This comp has the exact same camera animation as the foreground comp. The sphere is quite large, so the perspective matches what the sky would look like from where the camera is placed. Let's go back to the main comp. I added some glow layers using deep glow again. It's very subtle, but it does add a little bit if you watch it as a sequence. I also added a rain layer, which I exported from Cinema 4D, but this is very subtle. Then there is a color correction layer to darken the image. And lastly, the color grade. And finally, this was the Rec 709 version I exported. So moving on to shot 6, this was the original background plate I started with. For this layer I just reduced the exposure, then I added a couple of burnt wood textures to the window cover. I did some basic relighting, and this may seem extreme now, but that's because the smoke I add later on diffuses this quite a bit. Then I added a large scale smoke plume, and then just some fog to cover the entire frame. So then let's quickly go into the fire comp. It's just a bunch of fire elements from structural fire to ground fires. Also added fire debris falling out and a lot of fire embers. There is a duplicate of this layer with an add blending mode, then a smoke element to go on top. Then I added a heat distortion layer and masked around to only affect the top of the fire. This just blends the fire and the smoke together a bit better. Then the first glow layer affects the fire only. It adds this kind of warmth to it. Then the next glow layer is a little bit different. I set the input to the fire comp and made the radius quite big. Then I used a duplicate of the smoke plume to be the alpha map for the glow. So as you can see, it brightens the smoke plume based on the fire pre-comp. The blending mode for this layer is set to add. Then the last glow layer was using the same technique but for a smoke element that is masked around the top of the frame. So this just brightens those parts based on the fire comp as well. Then the foreground was the same as before, a mix of rotoscoping and keying, and then in the foreground pre-comp I also added a smoke element to affect the foreground. And then the layer above this is a light wrap made from the background comp. Then I also did an adjustment layer with a transform effect on it and slightly zoomed in to get rid of the black edges. And then finally the grade. Alright, so before I end the video, I just wanted to thank everyone who was part of the project. I wanted to thank Artlist for funding the project. Everyone did an incredible job and it was really fun to work with such a lovely people. And actually people I worked with since and will probably work a lot in the future as well. There are many things I wish I did differently on this project myself. There were only 2 shots that came out as I wanted them to, but it's all good because I can take this knowledge and apply it on the next project. Thank you for watching episode 1 of this behind the scenes series. Episode 2 will feature my favorite shot and also new faces, so subscribe to not miss out. Bye.